So hello everyone. First of all, can you all hear me well? Not really, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so thank you, Alex, for the wonderful introduction. There's the microphone. So my name is Vladimir Skultety. I am from Slovakia. I am an interpreter of Slovak, English, and Mandarin Chinese. And I would like to thank very much to Alex and to Richard and to all the organizers for organizing this wonderful event. And I think probably most of you who are here have never heard about me. I think that's normal because I'm not as active, as known as in the community as Alex or Richard. So I thought I would show you the video that Alex was talking about. It's going to be a short excerpt from that, 5 minutes. And yeah, we'll talk to you after that. So if you can play the video.
Languages in this video. Obviously, some languages I speak better, some languages I speak not so well. Takže ahojte všetci, prvých 10 jazykov v tomto videu budú jazyky, ktorými hovorím najlepšie. Budem improvizovať, to znamená, nemám nič pripravené, približne neviem, o čom budem hovoriť, ale bude to improvizácia. Sziasztok, a nevem Vladimir Skultety, azért beszélek magyarul barátom. Én szlovák vagyok, az apucím és az anyucím, ők is mind a ketten szlovákok. De úgy döntötték, hogy jó lenne, ha magyar óvodába menném, és ott is tanulnám meg a magyart, mert itt Kassán sok magyar van. Takže česky mluvím proto, protože jsem Slovák a protože studoval v Praze. Samozřejmě čeština není pro nás Slováky nějak obzvlášť těžký jazyk. Hello， 大家好，我是涛哥。那我要用中文解释一下我为什么在录这个 video。前几个礼拜，我参加了在柏林举办的一个语言高手会议，然后这个活动有来自很多不同国家的朋友，喜欢学外文的朋友，用不同国家语言交流。Привет всем, меня зовут Владимир, я начал изучать русский язык здесь в Словакии, после того продолжал в России, в Санкт-Петербурге. Вы знаете, я очень хорошо понимаю, что вот эти 30 или 40 секунд, когда я говорю на китайском, нельзя очень хорошо понять, говорю я на самом деле хорошо на этом языке или нет. Also einen sehr schönen guten Tag, ich bin der Vladimir. Auf Deutsch würde ich gerne das sagen, was ich schon auf Chinesisch gesagt habe, nämlich wieso ich dieses Video hier drehe. Also vor ein paar Wochen bin ich in Berlin gewesen und habe auf einer sehr geilen Konferenz teilgenommen. Ciao a tutti, mi chiamo Vladimir. Allora, l'italiano l'ho imparato in Italia, a Forlì, perché ho fatto Erasmus a Forlì. Questo non è importante adesso. Quello che volevo dire in italiano è che a me piacciono le lingue, però purtroppo non è sempre quando mi viene la voglia di parlare, diciamo, italiano o cinese che ci sia una persona con cui potrei usare questa lingua. Donc, bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Vladimir. En français, je vais dire la même chose que j'ai dit en chinois et en allemand en fait. Donc, pourquoi j'ai décidé à faire cette vidéo-là? Bueno, buenos días. Hasta ahora usaba los idiomas que conozco más o menos bien. Naturalmente son llenos de errores, entonces yo no digo que hablo perfectamente el ruso, el chino, mandarín. Y ahora voy a hablar en los idiomas que tenía que pedir ayuda a mis amigos para verificar eso que voy a decir. Zdravo svima, zovem se Vladimir. Počeo sam da učim srpski jezik oktobra prošle godine, posle konferencije Polyglota u Novom Sadu. Stvarno mi se dopao kako je jezik zvučao i bio sam oduševljen atmosferom u gradu. Salam! من ولادیمیر هستم از اسلوواکی. دوست داشتم یکم براتون به فارسی صحبت کنم. با اینکه فارسی را هم مثل زبونهای دیگه خیلی خوب حرف نمیزنم و برای این متن از دوست ایرانی کمک گرفتم. Cześć! Chciałbym teraz powiedzieć kilka słów po polsku, chociaż nie jest to język, którym posługuję się pięknie. Zwykle nie wymieniam polskiego wśród języków, które znam, bo niewiele już z nauki tego języka pamiętam, ale myślę, że przynajmniej moja pasywna znajomość polskiego jest nadal na dobrym poziomie. O português é outra língua que eu adoro muito, mas não tive a oportunidade de usar nem de aprender mais. Até tive que pedir ajuda ao meu amigo para verificar esse texto. Bună tuturor! Numele meu este Vladimir. Am vrut să spun ceva și în română, chiar dacă nu vorbesc această limbă aproape de tot și am cerut ajutorul unui prieten cu acest text pe care l-am învățat pe de rost. Ongeveer 10 jaar geleden heb ik wat Nederlands geleerd. Ik liep toen stage in onze hoofdstad en in de bibliotheek vond ik een boek om het Nederlands te leren. En omdat ik s'avonds niet veel te doen had, leende ik het boek en leerde ik daar van Nederlands van. Dankjewel, qua Kyoto, qua Shisu, qua Keila. Qua Toali Taiwan 的时阵，我做这朋友会晓讲台语，所以我嘛有学一点点嘛。皆さんこんにちは。私の名前はフラジミルです。スロバキア人です。数年前5ヶ月間ぐらい日本語を勉強しました。他の外国語と同じように日本語も少し友達に手伝ってもらいました。大家好，我少少廣東話，但係我啲廣東話唔係好好，希望第日可以講得更加好。另外，我好中意香港，多謝晒。That's it. Thank you very much.
So, of course, I don't speak like that every day. It took me some time to prepare for that. Like I said, the first 9 languages probably maybe, but the following 9 was prepared. But I tried to do it because I really spent a lot of time studying those languages and I wanted to have them in the video because it wasn't the first video like this. There was Richard did it, Luca did it, many other people, and I just wanted to have something like that out there too. So after the video, I had a lot of questions, and Richard called me one day and said, Vlad, what are you doing in October? And I said, I don't know, Richard. And he said, why don't you speak at the conference about your life? And that was so honoring and humbling because when Richard Simcott says that, you do that. You just say, Richard, man, I'm all right. I'm going to the conference. I'm going to talk about myself. So it's very humbling. I'm very happy to be here. One of the questions that I got was, and most often, when did you start learning the language that you speak? And I thought about it, and there never really was such a point in my life because I was born in Czechoslovakia, which the country doesn't exist now, but it was a country consisting of 2 countries, Czech Republic and Slovakia, and I was born in the southeast corner, 20 kilometers away from the Hungarian border. So we had a substantial Hungarian minority, and still have, in our city. And when I was growing up, my family is Slovak, 100% Slovak. My grandmother she speaks Hungarian, but still she's Slovak ethnically. And so at home we would speak Slovak, but right about the time when I was learning how to speak, my mom, she would go to Africa to visit my uncle, that's her brother, and she was away for about 4 weeks, and at that time, because everyone was busy at home, they found a Hungarian nanny to take care of me. And by the time she came back, she realized that I would speak Hungarian and Slovak because the Hungarian nanny didn't speak Slovak at all. And she had a really good idea that I'm very grateful for now to put me into Hungarian kindergarten so that I wouldn't forget the language. So basically I was growing up with Slovak as a native language, speaking that at home, and Hungarian, speaking that in the Hungarian kindergarten. For 4 years I was there, so I learned Hungarian just like a native speaker of Hungarian of 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, of the age of 5, 6, 7, 8. And the third language that I would learn as a native language as a kid was Czech, because it was Czechoslovakia, and all the culture and all the movies and all the books and everything, and especially children's stories, were from the Czech Republic. So I would spend my days listening to Czech children's stories, and passively I would learn Czech just like a native speaker, and actively we would sometimes, for fun, speak Czech among our friends. But Košice, my city where I'm from, is very, very far from the Czech Republic, so we don't have any contact to that. So basically, I had 3 native languages as a toddler, as a child growing up, and after that, when I was 8, my mom decided to send me into the United States, to send me here. It was right after the Velvet Revolution in 1989. Actually, it was 1990 when I came to the States for the first time, and I was staying with my aunt. She was too busy during the day, so she put me into an American day camp. And so basically for 8 hours a day, I was with American kids. Before that, I used to wake up at 5:30 to watch all the cartoons. As the Brady Bunch, the Jetsons, the Flintstones, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And then I was in the day camp, and I came back and I would watch Disney Afternoon until, until evening. So basically I was in an American environment for, 12, 13 hours every day. And you learn very fast when you're a kid like that. And I remember the exact moment when I realized that I speak English because we were having a game of kickball outside, and they explained to me the rules, but I was too shy to talk to them, but I knew the rules. And as we were playing, they told me that I was out. But I wasn't out. I knew that because I understood the rules. And I started arguing with the person. And about halfway through the argument, I realized that I'm speaking English. And so I kept yelling at the guy for another maybe 30 seconds because I was so happy that I spoke English finally. And that was the moment. I remember it was yesterday. And the fifth sort of native language that I had acquired as a child was German. We started having compulsory German classes in school when I was 12. And I failed miserably. I mean, the first exam, I wrote 16 mistakes. And my mom, she decided she had to intervene again. And so she looked for a tutor back home. And there was a German lady. It's a very interesting background. She was German, but Czech nationality, living in Košice in Slovakia, having a Hungarian husband who didn't speak Czech or any other language, so it was very interesting how they communicated. And I would go to her place twice a week, and when I went there the first time, she sat down and she looked at me and she started speaking German to me just right away. And I talked back. I didn't with limited German that I had, I felt it was fun, to be able to talk to her. In school I hated it, but to her somehow it was different. And she said, okay, he can stay here, he's good. So I was going to her classes. I was taking her classes twice a week. And after the first year of classes with her, my mom had sent me to Austria to her friends. And they had sons about the same age as me. And after one summer, somehow, when you're young, you really learn so fast. So everything I knew just got activated. And yeah, I can basically say that, of course not now, I speak much worse German than I used to, or Hungarian. But at that time, I think I had maybe 5 languages that I spoke at a native level when I was about 13. So time passed. My grandmother's sister, she took it on, sort of viewed it as her lifelong task to cultivate my languages, and she made me go to her house every Friday after school when everyone was out enjoying themselves. There was no internet back then, so everyone was just out. And I had to go to her place to talk to her in Hungarian. She spoke Hungarian, and I had to be there for 2 hours. The first hour we would speak Hungarian, and the other hour she was trying to teach me some French, some basic poems, some basic grammar, so I would learn at least something. And that was basically my childhood. And it sounds like it's more, like 5 languages at such a high level. It's a little bit more, but believe me, in my country, it was it was a frequent thing that someone spoke 2 languages. It wasn't uncommon for someone to speak 3, and everyone had to learn English and German in school. So it was just a question of how well we spoke those languages, not whether we spoke that many. I think that was the case. So I didn't feel any special, or I didn't even cross my mind to learn language because I wanted to. I mean, why would I, when I can be outside with my friends and play? Why should I be learning languages? And it just accumulated really at that point. And so then high school happened when I didn't really do much of anything except for maybe party and and that. And there was no incentive to learn more. And all the way to my university studies, where suddenly I met people that were really, really extremely talented. I might have spoken better English, but there were definitely people who spoke better Hungarian and German. And in Slovakia we have this thing. Maybe in the States you have it, or in other countries you have it too. Bilingual high schools. So basically all subjects would be in, I don't know, depending on the high school, but let's say Italian or English or German or French, depending on what kind of a bilingual high school it was. So these people spoke amazing French. It was like their native language because they had really 4 years of high school studies in French. So it's just unbelievable. And so I kind of woke up at that point because I had an incentive to learn more. And we had the chance to study Spanish and Russian at the university. I studied international relations. But I failed miserably. I failed in both because I think Richard Simcott would fail too, given the system in which we were learning those languages. The Spanish classes were at 7:30 in the morning on Monday, in a classroom that was twice the size of this, 200 people easily there, with a small teacher, small professor, whom I couldn't even hear. And it doesn't really matter how tall she was, I just couldn't hear her. I was really so far. And she would just read what was in the textbook. She was just reading it. And we were expected to take a test the next week from what we were talking about. So of course, I mean, how can you learn a language like that? And the Russian course was, we didn't have such a big group. There weren't 200 students. There was maybe 15 of us. But the teacher was too nice, you know. We didn't even study Russian during that course. And I failed that. I mean, I did pass the test, both in Spanish and Russian, but I didn't learn neither of the two languages. And it wasn't until I was in my first year of master's when I had the chance to go to Italy on an exchange sort of study through an exchange study program. And I really wanted to know, did I learn these languages because I was in the environment, or did I learn the language because I was maybe better or talented than the others, or more talented than others? And I went to Italy, and I had only three conditions. I wanted to pay rent lower than 300 euro per month. I wanted to live in the city center, and I wanted to live with Italians only. So I had one roommate from the south of Italy, two girls from Milan, and one guy from Modena. And so on the first day I bought a book in Italian, Old Man and the Sea, and I started reading over the dictionary. So of course the first 7 pages I was reading for 3 hours. But because I had the feeling that Italian is a very transparent language, and you could sort of understand what you don't understand. So I tried to decipher the language on my own, and the rest of the time I would not go to classes, but I would talk to my Italian roommates. And I went to Italy when I was about, it was February, and in June, it was about 1st June, I think, I had the first university oral exam in history. It was history of Eastern Europe, and it was in Italian. So I had to talk for 30 minutes to the professor in Italian about the history of Eastern Europe. I can remember the question. It was about the revolution in Hungary. And for me, that's a pass. I mean, maybe I didn't speak completely fluently. Maybe I had an accent. But if you pass a university exam for 30 minutes talking to a professor, I felt like that was something that I could say that that's the language that I speak. And then I stayed with Italian, and I learned more. So I tried to develop as much as I could. And a very important thing happened in Italy. I met a guy who is very similar to, I think, to a lot of people that are here today at the conference. He was very passionate about languages, and he was learning languages like Richard said it. He was learning them for no apparent reason whatsoever. He liked to learn languages. And I went to his home, and he had dictionaries in Arabic and Finnish and in Japanese. And I'm like, why are you learning all these languages, you know? And he asked me, well, why didn't you ever learn a difficult language? And he had kind of a little, irony in his voice, like, yeah, you speak 5-6 languages, but no Chinese. And I started to think about it, and it really never crossed my mind. I'm from Košice, which is a city of 240,000 people in the middle of nowhere, and in all the way to where the Ukrainian border is. And if you go to bookstores or libraries at that time, there was nothing except for English, German, Russian, Spanish, and that was it. There were very few Chinese people, some Vietnamese people, but I didn't know any. So I never really had the thought cross my mind. I was just this guy from Eastern Europe who came to Italy and started to learn Italian, and but it sort of clicked with me. So I said, all right, let me try that. Maybe it really was just a coincidence that I learned all these languages, and went back home, and I decided that I would like to learn either Arabic or Chinese. And I decided for Arabic, and I started looking for an Arabic tutor. I found an Arabic tutor, and she said, fantastic, I'm going to teach you, but I have to go on vacation for 2 weeks. So is that all right? I'm like, yeah, it's all right. We can start after that. But I was so eager to learn a difficult language that the next day I already started researching about Chinese. And I started learning Chinese, and I never learned Arabic, and I became an interpreter in Chinese like 10 years later. So small things like that determine your destiny. And yeah, I started learning Chinese, but I understood that it was going to be too difficult to learn on my own. Like no matter how I looked at it, it was just too hard. And I realized that I would have to go to Taiwan or China and spend some time there. And I graduated from my master's, like from the university that I was at. It was international relations. I took a year off, came to New York, worked at Times Square, tried to learn Spanish. The way I did it, I was commuting to New York. It took me an hour, and during that commute, I would listen to Spanish news. And I didn't speak a word of Spanish, but again, it seemed so transparent because I spoke Italian. So what I tried to do was I tried to literally just without a dictionary, without anything, try to understand the news. Just concentrate really, really hard, and with the knowledge of Italian and English, and try to sort of understand what they're talking about. And unbelievably, it worked. Like I first started to separate the sentences, then separate the words, then individuate the words that I knew from Italian, and it started to sort of like demask itself. And at work, I had colleagues from Dominican Republic and Puerto Ricans, and I would talk to them. I would read books in Spanish the same way I learned Italian. And after 3-4 months, my Spanish wasn't amazing, but I could understand the news without having to use the dictionary, without having to pause, and I could talk to anyone for hours without having to switch to English. And for me, that was all right. I mean, I certainly don't speak fantastic Spanish, but for me, that was okay. And I still thought that somewhere in the future, I would like to go into a Spanish-speaking country so that I could get better in that. Came back home, and I did the same thing with Russian. I started to listen to a lot of Russian, like almost 8 hours a day of Russian news. And same thing, no dictionary. Well, actually, I did use a dictionary already. And same thing, about a month in, Russian is very, very close to Slovak and Czech, so it was easier to understand, but not so easy to speak. I went to Russia. I was there for 1 month. And yeah, it was pretty much enough to get to the level that I wanted to. Again, I don't speak fabulous Russian. I have friends here that can testify that. But yeah, sometimes when I'm really practicing and when I'm really at my best, it could be a C1 level, C1 plus maybe, especially because it's so close to Slovak. And then the big decision came to go to Taiwan and to learn Chinese. But anyway, I looked at it, it was too expensive. It would cost me about $20,000-$30,000 US. I'm like, I'm going to have to find a different way around it. And my friend, a Czech friend, he told me, why don't you try to study Chinese at the Chinese department in Prague? Because the relations between Czech Republic and Slovakia are fantastic. So if you pass the entrance exams for any Czech university, you can study for free. You have the right to have a dorm. You get scholarship. It's fantastic. You just have to pass the test, and the ratio between the people who are willing to get in and who actually get in is terrible. It was like 300 wanted to get in and 15 would pass. So I'm like, just that? Okay, I'll try. And I passed. I was the 15th. I was the last person who would get in. So again, a very small thing, just determining your entire future. So I would be in Prague, studying Chinese and Chinese literature, Chinese classical Chinese, which is another language that I think that. Yeah, it's difficult to say how well you can speak a dead language because it's hard. But I was working on a dictionary of Chinese characters and character etymology, and I was working only with material written in classical Chinese. So I think I can't really judge how well I know classical Chinese, but to be able to do that, I think it's not a great level, but it's a pretty good level still. So after 2 years in Prague, I went to Taiwan. And I lived there for 5 years. The first year I came as an exchange student. I was supposed to be there only for 6 months, 1 semester. But it's for some reason, I mean, it didn't happen with Chinese. I mean, I gave it everything. I was studying 10 hours a day, more than that, just listening to news, to podcasts, doing exercises, everything possible, and nothing was working. And it seems as if I hit the wall, and so many times I kept doing that for like, I don't know how many times. And so I decided I had to stay more, so I stayed another semester, and still nothing. So I said, yeah, I'm going to have to stay more. And I ended up staying for another 4 years, so that's 5 years in total. A very nice, but a very difficult and very challenging stay, because I was in a almost 100% Taiwanese environment, very few Western friends. The culture is very different. The weather is tough. Salaries are low, and life costs are high. I was broke most of the time. So, and the only reason why I was there was that I still felt that my Chinese wasn't where I wanted it to be. I mean, for me, always when I was learning a language, and I guess as I explained it, was to be completely fluent in it, like to be able to read everything I want, to be able to write anything I want as fast as I would do it in Slovak or English, to be just functional, you know, do whatever in the language you want and not be limited by it by any way. And it wasn't happening in Chinese. I mean, there was still that one odd word or that expression that I didn't understand, and it didn't happen just once. It was constant, and people didn't understand what I was talking about. So I had to like pull through. And after 5 years, when I was really, really exhausted, I said, yeah, it's probably enough. So I decided to go back home. While I was in Taiwan, I learned a little bit of Taiwanese. It's a difficult language to learn for me because I didn't click with the culture too much. Like there was nothing that was attractive, and it's really hard if you want to learn something that you don't want to learn. It was pretty much the case with Chinese too, because I thought it was too hard. I didn't like the sound of it particularly until I found speakers of Chinese that had very nice voices. And it's really hard if you want to learn something that you don't want to learn. So probably that was one of the reasons why I didn't learn Chinese for such a long time. I just couldn't make it. And another language that I learned or I tried to learn, I studied in Taiwan, was Japanese. Because in the building where I was living, there was a Japanese guy who came to study Chinese. And I told him that, you know what, I can teach you Chinese and you teach me Japanese. And we would have fantastic sessions. We would just walk in the park, and our classes would be something along the lines of me trying to say something in Japanese, and he would tell me how to say it. And then again, another sentence and another sentence. And no stress. I didn't even note anything down. And the only thing that I did was I asked him to record for me in very simple sentences what we were talking about during our class, and I would listen to it until our next class. It was just nothing too stressful. Especially after Chinese, I was so drained and so demotivated to study anything really. Like I didn't even want to learn anything new in general, not just languages, because it was just so hard. And I came back from Taiwan. There was not many options that I could have, so the thing that I used to do before was interpret and translate. And I said, yeah, I can do this until I figure out what I want to do. So I started to work as an English, Mandarin, Slovak interpreter. And the two remaining languages that I've learned were, I've studied, were Serbian and Cantonese. And again, the same thing that I did before. Just listen a lot, read books with a dictionary, and talk a lot to my friends, practice the languages as much as I could. So, as I said, people ask me when I started learning languages. I don't know. It was just, it just went on. But I think I know where I have the passion for languages. If you can show the picture that I want to show you. Yeah, so it's me up there. That's my aunt, that's my grandmother, and those are my aunt's friends. It was here in the U.S. in 1991, I think, when I was about 10, I think. And we had a wonderful dinner, and if you can see this, we're Slovak, that lady's, I think, Lithuanian or Romanian. The gentleman was Japanese, she's Taiwanese, and the two ladies are from South Africa. And I had an idea after the dinner to play a game where and my uncle is holding the camera, he's Slovak too, to play a game where we would say one sentence in the languages that we know. And we ended up having about 20 languages. And we would say like, hey, what's your name, or how are you doing, or I work as this and that. And everyone was so into it. So for the next 2 hours, we would just, everyone say that one sentence. So we would have Slovak, Czech, Hungarian, English, German, French, and then Japanese, Chinese, Taiwanese. That would probably Romanian and Russian, and then I think 3 African languages. And that was just it. I came home, and I remember that's what I wanted to do. So yeah, thank you for listening to my story. 你好。
also learning languages and wants to be multilingual. What advice would you sort of give to yourself when you were learning these languages, or from learning from mistakes that you've had with language learning? What advice would you give to others?
As far as advice that I would give to myself, I think I did it right. I mean, I don't want to say, I don't want to, I know it's terrible to say, but yeah, I mean, it's not that bad. I wouldn't change that much, but probably when it comes to Chinese, probably have different reasons to learn the language. Like, the reason that I had was I liked Chinese characters and I thought that it was going to be a very useful language. And that's not enough. There has to be some emotional attachment to it. Because with Chinese and languages like that, over the long run, you will lose motivation very fast. And if you don't have something emotional that is pulling you towards it, then reason is not enough. So yeah, probably that. Have the correct reason. Yeah.
Okay. So I have a question for you. I recently dealt with probably the worst frustration while learning a language, and what's surprising, it wasn't my second or third, it was my sixth language. Mm-hmm. And I want to know, for everybody's sake, how do you deal with the frustration? Like, you already explained quite in detail, like the frustrations of the process of learning Chinese, and I quite relate for that. But concretely, how do you deal with like the coming back to a language over and over again?
Yeah, Chinese is a very good example because the first 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times you're like, I'm going to grit my teeth and just start again. But the 11th time is not fun anymore. Yes, I don't know. I'm sorry. It's very hard. It's really very hard. Just pull through. There wasn't even a light at the end of the tunnel anymore. It was just, I was nowhere, and I was like, what am I doing? Suddenly it appeared again. So just have faith that you will regain the motivation again, and maybe just if you record yourself regularly throughout the process and then go back and see how much progress you've done, and just kind of measure that this happened in this time frame and this is going to happen in the next one. If I continue, maybe that's going to give you the motivation.
Thank you.
Hi, back here.
I can't see.
I'll stand up.
I see, yeah.
So I am Korean American, and I was forced to learn Chinese as a child, and I really hated it as well. But is that why you haven't? I noticed that you haven't. Korean was not one of the languages in your video, so I was just wondering if your hatred for Chinese kind of motivated you not to learn Korean.
No, actually no. And I would like. Well, I had the thought of learning Korean. The thing is that after Chinese and after knowing how long it would take me, I'm just not ready for that because it would take me another, 5, 6, 7 years to. I've set myself goals that are very, very high, and to be able to achieve what I would like to achieve with Korean, it would take another 6 years of my life. So, I'm very interested in the culture and the language. It's very nice, but I'm realistic. It's probably not going to happen.
Hi.
Where?
Yeah. Hi. I'm from Taiwan. I think you speak great Mandarin with cute Taiwanese accent. And just wondering that, what's the most difficult part you found in learning Chinese, learning Mandarin? Is it grammar or characters, or is it pronunciation? And do you have any feedback or advice for Mandarin teachers when they're teaching foreign students? Thank you.
All right, so first thing that I would like to say is that characters are not what makes Chinese difficult. It's a huge misconception, I think. A lot of people say, Chinese is easy, but weren't it for the characters? But characters are, if any of you had taken any university exam, you know how much information you can stuff into your head in 1 week, or even in 1 day if you like. So the only problem with characters is that there's a lot of them. That's it. And that's not that much of a problem, right? Because you can learn that. A much bigger problem is that Chinese is just so different and so difficult, and so many things that, I try to learn languages by practicing it as soon as I can, because I think that's how you learn the fastest. You just practice. And to get to the point where you can start doing that in Chinese, it's just incredibly long. It's like, a couple of months. And how can you stay motivated when 3 months into your studies and you're still like, so how are you? Like, It's really hard. So the pronunciation, the structures, the fact that you have to learn a new expression for each situation. This is hard to explain, but for instance, I was in my house. I was going with my friend. We were taking the lift, elevator, going downstairs, and I had a bag, and I went to leave it at the Guanliyuan, at the person at the front desk. And all of a sudden, whatever I would say would be wrong because I didn't ever hear the phrase that a Taiwanese speaker would say, which would be 我可以借放一下吗? It's an expression which would never come across my mind, never. And this is what is you have to be in a situation like that for every single situation in your Chinese living in your life, and that's what's the hardest part about it, I think, because otherwise it's not about not sounding native. It's really sometimes that people just don't understand what you're saying.
Excuse me.
Where are we?
Right here. My question would be if somebody was going to study abroad or to live in, say, China or Japan or Korea or some place where there's an Asian language spoken, what would your advice be for them to absorb the language quickest?
Find a group of like-minded two friends and spend it with them. Two is the key word, I think, because if there's more, there's a chance that you will be quiet and you will not be included into discussions. And if you're only with one person, you might feel too much stress. And plus, when you talk to only one person, you don't see how two people interact. And there's slightly different grammar used in that and vocabulary in that when two people interact and when you just hear what they're talking about or talking about other people. So I would say find a group of people and hang out with them as much as you can. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. Hello?
I can't see. All right.
How did you learn to speak Farsi? You never mentioned that in your presentation.
That was interesting. I was very interested in Farsi for a very long time because it was just because of one movie that I saw. And that was just the spark, But then many things, I realized that I knew, shamingly little about the Muslim world. And Iran was just when you come, Indonesia, it's right in the middle. So I was kind of like a starting point. It was like a bridge to Arabic because there's so many Arabic words in it. And when I was in Taiwan, I had a colleague who was from Iran. And he didn't have time, but he hooked me up with this cousin who was in Isfahan in Iran. And we would have, she was the most amazing teacher. She was so patient. We would have 3 lessons a week. I was butchering the language and talking to her for hours every lesson. And she would just listen and talk to me and was very happy that someone was learning her language. And yeah, but I was already exhausted from Chinese, so I didn't have the incentive to learn, so I didn't really want to learn it. But I was okay learning it. So that's why I don't speak it fluently, I think, or that fluent. That's how it happened. Yeah.
Hello? Does
Yeah.
that work? Okay. Thank you for telling us a story of basically your language autobiography. I wanted to know if you could share with us more stories of sort of the different revelations, because I know going from 1 to 2 languages, there were sort of insights and revelations that I would have, and going from 2 to more languages, there's another batch of those that happen. What is it like to get to 20? Can you share a little more with us about that?
Yeah, I'm not really sure I'm the most competent person to talk about that. I'm sure there are many experts here and to talk about it. But for me personally, it just seems like it's the same thing. Your thoughts go and you just switch. It doesn't matter if it's the 3rd or the 5th or it's I don't know. It's I had a good metaphor, I forgot what it was, but yeah, basically it's just for me personally. I feel like if I switch to Czech now or to Slovak now, it's gonna take a bit, maybe 5 seconds until I catch the flow, but it's just the same thing going. It continues. It's probably more difficult with Chinese because I literally have to switch my entire personality. There are many things that you have to be aware of when you speak Chinese to Chinese people. For instance, what's your relation to the person in terms of is he higher in the society, lower? Are you friends? Are you close friends? And many other things. So you have to be really cautious about that. Otherwise, they will not be mad, but you will mess up. But other than that, I think it's still just continuing your own personality in different languages. You just switch and you go.
明白了，谢谢。
客气。
So, all right. So primarily two questions. The first, a comment. You did an extraordinarily good job. And this issue one, what makes a good polyglot video? And two, given as your language learning began before the 1990s, and technology has made leaps, sometimes quantum leaps, to what degree does that impact language learning, especially as spaced repetition software is concerned?
All right. So that's why I did the polyglot video. I was waiting for a very, very long time. It wasn't something that I was thinking about every day, but I saw Alex, I saw Richard, I saw Luca, other people, and I just thought I would like to do something like that too. I mean, there's no shame in it. I was afraid. I didn't want to come across as a show-off. It was pretty hard. I had I'm from Slovakia, and it's an ex-socialist communist country, and it's not a good thing to be that. And so I waited for a very, very long time until I was sure there was like about 50 of those videos out there already. So that would be like one in the crowd, and I was hoping that nobody would actually even discover the video, and so that's why I did the polyglot video, to make it sort of like a business card, basically, in the world of this world. And as to spaced repetition software and the leaps in technology, look, I mean, the reason why I never thought of learning Chinese was when I was a kid and growing up was because I never heard about it. But I'm pretty sure that kids in Slovakia today, they can just Google it. So had I known it back then, who knows? Yeah, maybe I would have learned it earlier. And spaced repetition software, I'm not a fan of, and I'm not sure if I can mention the name of the software, so I'm not going to mention it. It starts with an A. Because I found personally, I'm a pretty lazy person. Not lazy, but I don't like to waste time. And I found that I was working with this. It took me longer to put in the data into Anki or memorize than I actually did the reviews, And another thing was that for me, it wasn't suddenly about learning words. It was about passing the daily quota, So I would go through the deck, which was about, I don't know, it was accumulating. It was stressful. So I said, no, I'm not going to use that. But I do use pen and paper. I write down words and I review that every week, every evening. Write little indexes next to words that I know so I can skip them, or actually no, to the words that I don't know. So that's basically spaced repetition in a way.
Okay. Vlad, first of all, I commend you for staying with Chinese for so long. Personally, I studied for 4 years in college, and I spent a semester in China, and I still felt that my Chinese was pretty terrible. And I would turn on TV shows and not be able to understand even a single word. Yeah. Try and talk to people in the streets and just get lost quickly. So I admire you for your persistence with it.
Thank you.
Did you find that you ever found your Chinese personality or kind of your Chinese self that allowed you to become
Not
more?
There yet. No, not there yet.
Okay, still working on it though,
Yeah.
I assume. Okay.
Yeah, because you have to be really good in Chinese to be able to do that.
Okay, that is my question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vlad, for that really nice story.